It was still dark when the guards began their shift, their boots clanking down the concrete corridors of Ironwood State Prison like a metronome counting down a man's final hours. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a lifeless glow over the cells, while the air felt heavy, stale, like the place itself had long stopped caring about hope. Leonard Len Jackson had barely slept. Shackled to a steel bed in the solitary wing, he stared up at the flickering ceiling bulb. Every blink a reminder that this was the day he was going to die. Outside his cell, routine echoed with indifference, guards murmuring, keys jangling, announcements crackling over the intercom. But inside Len, nothing felt routine. Today was the end, or at least it was supposed to be. In just a few hours, they were going to move him to the execution chamber. No appeals left, no family waiting outside. Just a prison chaplain who visited occasionally with soft prayers and a warmer presence than anyone else he'd encountered in 5 long years. The only thing Len had asked for was a simple, final wish: to see Eclipse, the German shepherd he'd rescued before all this happened. It was the only thread left connecting him to the life he lost. He'd said it again just yesterday to the guard posted outside his cell, voice cracking from lack of sleep and the weight of 1,000 memories. "I'd like to see Eclipse before I die." He didn't expect a yes. He hadn't expected one the first time he asked, or the 5th. But still, he asked. Because that dog wasn't just a pet. Eclipse was family. The kind that greets you at the door when everything else has fallen apart. Who knows when you're broken without needing to ask. Len remembered every walk they took together through the quiet streets of Redwood City, Eclipse's leash tugging playfully as they moved in sync like two halves of one calm rhythm. Back then, Len had a life. Fiancé, job, a future. Then came the arrest, the trial, the sentence. A murder he swore he didn't commit, and no one wanted to believe him. Everyone but Helen, his fiancée, and maybe Reverend Morris, the chaplain who never outright said Len was innocent but never treated him like a monster either. Now, hours from execution, Len clung to that one hope: not to be saved, not even to be believed. Just to see his dog one last time. The warden, Mara Batista, had passed by his cell the evening before. Her stance was rigid, but there was something in her eyes, fatigue maybe, or some shadow of sympathy she didn't want to show. Len had asked her again, barely lifting his head off the thin pillow, "If there's any mercy left, let me see Eclipse." She didn't promise anything, just said, "I'll see what I can do, but don't get your hopes up." That phrase had become the chorus of Len's life. Don't get your hopes up. He'd heard it from lawyers, from guards, even from his own exhausted mind. Still, he couldn't help hoping. As the warden walked away, Len leaned his head back against the wall and let the silence swallow him. There were murmurs outside, some protest forming at the prison gates. One guard muttered that half the crowd thought Len was guilty, the other half wanted the death penalty abolished. None of it mattered. He wasn't thinking about justice or vengeance or politics. He was thinking about the way Eclipse used to nudge open the bedroom door with his nose and climb onto the bed when Len had nightmares. About how that dog saved him long before prison tried to destroy him. As dawn crept through the high slit of a window, a watery strip of pink sky peeked through, casting a fragile light on the cold, blue walls. Len dragged himself off the bed and shuffled toward the light, the chains around his ankles rattling with each step. It was strange, the things your mind clings to when you're facing the end. Not courtroom speeches, not cell doors slamming shut, just soft mornings and paws on pavement. He closed his eyes and pictured Eclipse trotting beside him, tail wagging, tongue out, always eager to greet the day like it was a gift. People used to stop them on the street. "You train him yourself?" they'd ask, and Len, grinning with quiet pride, would nod. Eclipse wasn't just smart, he was loyal to the bone. And right now, loyalty was the only thing Len had left to believe in. A guard's voice cut through the haze. "Jackson, time to move." Len turned, already extending his wrists through the slot in the cell door. The cuffs clicked into place with a mechanical finality. "Any word on Eclipse?" he asked. The guard didn't look at him. "They're checking. Don't hold your breath." Helen Griggs was already up when the call came in. Not that she'd really slept. Her small townhouse was quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your ears when you're waiting for something you can't control. The TV had been off for hours, but the last image still burned in her mind. A news anchor announcing Len Jackson's scheduled execution at Ironwood State Prison. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the phone. "Hello?" she answered, recognizing the prison number. "Miss Griggs?" came the voice on the other end. Calm, official, but not cold. "Warden Batista here. I'm calling about Leonard Jackson's final request." Helen held her breath. For a heartbeat, she thought they might be calling to say the governor granted a stay, but the warden's next words hit different. "He's requested to see his dog, Eclipse. He says the dog is in your care." Helen nearly dropped the phone. "He still wants to see Eclipse?" she whispered, voice catching. "Yes. We've received conditional approval, but you'll need to be here in 90 minutes, otherwise—" "It won't happen." Helen didn't hesitate. "We're on our way," she said, already reaching for the leash. Eclipse, curled in his dog bed by the kitchen table, perked up instantly at her energy, his eyes locked with hers, alert, maybe even confused. She knelt down and stroked his head. "We're going to see Len," she murmured, voice trembling. Eclipse wagged his tail once, sensing her urgency even if he couldn't understand her words. She threw on a jacket, grabbed keys, and opened the door. Time was running out. The truck roared to life as the first real light of morning broke across the sky. Helen drove faster than she should have, cutting through empty streets still bathed in gray. Every red light felt like a threat, every delay a potential heartbreak. She glanced at Eclipse in the rearview mirror. The dog sat still, head low, eyes scanning the world beyond the window. Did he remember Len? Did he know where they were going? Helen gripped the steering wheel tighter, her heart racing with a cocktail of fear and longing. For 5 years she'd carried the weight of Len's conviction like a wound that refused to close. She never stopped believing in his innocence, even when friends told her to move on, even when the system slammed the door shut. All she had left of the life they'd planned together was Eclipse, and a relentless ache in her chest. If this was really Len's final morning, if the clock was ticking down for real, then at least she could give him this, a chance to say goodbye to the only soul who'd stayed constant through it all. As she approached the towering fences of ironwood, she whispered to herself and to the dog, "Just hold on, Len. Please, hold on." The guards at Ironwood didn't waste time. Once Helen gave her name and stated her purpose, she was directed to a side entrance away from the main gate, where a clipboard-armed officer checked her ID and motioned for her to park. "Wait in the vehicle," he instructed. "We'll confirm everything with the warden." She nodded and rolled up the window, her breath fogging the glass. Eclipse let out a soft whine, sensing the tension in the air. Helen reached back and stroked his head, whispering, "Just a little longer, boy. You'll see him soon." The dog pressed his nose into her palm, a quiet act of reassurance that nearly undid her. She glanced at her reflection in the mirror, eyes red, jaw tight, hair pulled into a hurried bun. There wasn't time for dignity, only for this sliver of hope. Somewhere inside that building, Len was likely sitting in a sterile room, surrounded by white walls and the ticking countdown to death. She tried to picture how he might look now. Thinner, tired, maybe grayer around the temples. But his dimple, God, she hoped it was still there. The dimple he used to flash when he told her bad jokes just to make her laugh. She blinked away the tears and forced herself to breathe. The door opened suddenly, and a guard in a different uniform stepped outside, signaling her to come in. Back in the prison, Len had been moved to the final holding cell, an antiseptic room that felt more like a clinic than a cell, but no less like a tomb. White-tiled walls, a steel bunk, a camera in the corner, and an observation window he could feel eyes peering through. He'd barely touched the meal they'd brought, a cheeseburger and soda he'd requested not out of hunger, but because it reminded him of the day he and Helen picked up Eclipse from the rescue shelter. Garcia, a female correctional officer, had been the one to unshackle him and drop the meal on the table. "You'll be prepped in about 30 minutes, she had said, trying to keep her voice level. "If the warden says yes, you'll see your dog." Len had simply nodded. What else was there to say? Every second ticked by like it was dragging a brick across his skin. He didn't eat, he couldn't. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bunk, fingers twitching, eyes locked on the door. In his head, a storm of questions spun wild. Would Eclipse recognize him? Would Helen really come? Could this one, small mercy actually be granted after everything? And then, just when he'd begun to feel the hope thinning into despair, he heard footsteps. The door clicked, and when it opened, his breath caught in his throat. Warden Batista stepped into the room first, her face stern but not unreadable. Behind her, clutching a leash with trembling fingers, was Helen, and bounding beside her, ears up and tail wagging so fast it was a blur, was Eclipse. The moment the dog saw Len, it was like the air cracked open with electricity. Eclipse let out a sharp, emotional bark, then yanked the leash free and sprinted across the room. His nails clattered against the tile floor as he launched himself at Len, who had fallen to his knees before the dog even reached him. "Hey, buddy," Len whispered, his voice choking on tears as Eclipse buried his head in his chest and let out a series of excited whines, half cry, half celebration. The guard standing in the corner moved to intervene, but Batista raised a hand to stop him. "Let them have this," she said softly. Len held Eclipse tight, burying his face in the dog's scruffy neck. The fur was softer than he remembered, thicker, and streaked with a hint of white that hadn't been there 5 years ago. But the eyes, the pale, ice-blue eyes, were still the same, full of devotion, full of understanding. Helen stood by the doorway, hands clasped over her chest, her entire body shaking. Len looked up at her, and for a second, no words came. They didn't need to. His eyes said everything. Pain, gratitude, regret, love. "Helen," he breathed. She took a step forward, eyes glistening. "I tried," she said, her voice breaking. "I begged them to look again. I did everything I could." Len shook his head, still kneeling with Eclipse pressed against him. "You did more than anyone." They both fell silent, the only sound in the room the soft whimpering of a dog who had waited far too long for his human to return. Warden Batista cleared her throat gently. 15 minutes, she said. "Then the chaplain will come in. After that, the doctor." Her voice softened at the end, almost like it pained her to say the words. Len nodded slowly. "Thank you," he managed, glancing at her, then back at Helen. She knelt down beside him, and for a few minutes, the three of them just existed in that space. Nothing more to prove, nothing left to beg for. Just time, raw and fleeting and unspeakably precious. Helen reached out and took Len's hand, her fingers cool and trembling against his. Eclipse settled between them, tail thumping slowly on the tile floor, head switching from one to the other like he was trying to hold them both together. "I never rehomed him," Helen said softly, stroking the dog's back. "Even when people told me it would be easier to move on, I couldn't." Len looked at her with a depth of emotion that no words could carry. He knew what that meant. The years she spent visiting, writing letters that sometimes went unanswered when he couldn't bear to reply, fighting legal battles no one wanted to hear about. She had stayed, maybe not in the physical sense, but emotionally, spiritually. Helen never let go, and neither had Eclipse. For those few minutes, Len let himself forget the ticking clock and the steel that framed every inch of his world. He sank his face into the dog's fur, breathing in that comforting smell he thought he'd never experience again. It brought back the ache of normalcy, of Sunday mornings, messy apartments, shared laughter, of a life that had once seemed permanently his. Batista gave them their time. Exactly 15 minutes later, she stepped back in, clearing her throat gently. "It's time," she said, but her voice lacked the sharp edge it usually held. Helen blinked away tears and stood, wrapping her arms tightly around herself. "I'll be outside," she said, her voice cracking. She gave Len's shoulder one final squeeze. "I'll be here until the end." Then she turned and walked out, and the door clicked shut behind her. Len remained on the floor with Eclipse, who pawed at his leg gently, as if sensing the shift. The air felt heavier now, but not entirely hopeless. There was something grounding in Eclipse's presence, an anchor against the chaos building outside. "I never stopped loving you, boy," Len whispered, his voice thick. "Not for one damn second." He ran a hand through the dog's fur, remembering all the nights he nearly gave up, all the times he held on for one more day, just by imagining this exact moment. Eclipse didn't understand execution chambers or wrongful convictions, but he understood loss and love. And now, reunited, both man and dog sat in a silent, sacred space neither time nor injustice could fully steal. The room grew quiet again, save for the sound of Eclipse's gentle breathing and the occasional metallic clink from the guard stationed beyond the observation window. Len stayed on the floor, one arm wrapped around the dog, the other resting on his knee. He didn't want to move, didn't want to face what came next. He kept talking, low and steady, as if Eclipse could absorb his pain through words alone. "I used to dream of walking you again," he murmured. down by the creek, letting you off leash. Just for a minute, pretending like the world was normal. His voice faltered. Some nights I thought about ending it all, but I'd close my eyes and think about you, about Helen, and that'd carry me through till morning. Eclipse whined and pushed his snout into Len's chest, tail brushing slowly along the floor. The connection between them was something prison hadn't managed to sever, a thread woven through years of silence, trial transcripts, and fluorescent light. "It's not fair," Len said, more to the walls than anyone else. 5 years gone. I never got to clear my name. I never got to show anyone the truth. His throat closed again. He stroked behind Eclipse's ears. "But you always knew. Didn't you?" Just then, a soft knock on the steel door broke the moment. The chaplain had arrived. A quiet voice called out, "Leonard, may I come in?" Len wiped at his face quickly and nodded, though the door was still closed. A guard stepped in, gently pulling Eclipse away from Len's side. The German shepherd resisted, whining, digging his paws into the floor like he could somehow stay forever. Len leaned forward and kissed the top of the dog's head. "Go on, boy," he whispered. "I'll see you soon." The cell door slid shut with a cold finality. Len sat back against the bunk as Chaplain Morris entered with a Bible in hand, his presence as steady and calm as ever. "I hear they're preparing the chamber," Morris said gently, "but I wanted to sit with you, unless you'd prefer to be alone." Len shook his head. "No, please. I'm glad you're here." They sat in quiet prayer, the kind that didn't ask for miracles but simply offered presence. Len wasn't sure what he believed anymore, but right now, he believed in the comfort of company, the honesty in shared silence, and in the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end after all. As Chaplain Morris recited soft prayers, Len tried to listen, but his mind buzzed with static. He caught fragments, words about peace, redemption, forgiveness, but they felt distant, like echoes from someone else's story. His body sat still on the narrow bunk, but his heart was pacing laps inside his chest. He thought of his mother, long gone now, who raised him to believe that the truth always came to light. He wondered if she'd feel peace knowing her son was about to die, still proclaiming innocence. Or would she be broken by it? Would she have stood outside the prison gates holding a sign, yelling into the void with everyone else who believed the system sometimes got it wrong? A heavy knock interrupted the chaplain's final words. The door creaked open and Warden Batista stepped in again, her face unreadable but tense. She looked to Morris and said in a hushed tone, "Chaplain, I need a word with Mr. Jackson." Morris stood and nodded, offering Len a quiet squeeze on the shoulder as he exited. Len stared at Batista, trying to brace himself. "What is it?" he asked. "Is it time?" Her next words hit like a thunderclap. "No. We've received new information, financial records that might indicate you were framed." Len blinked, not understanding. "On that basis," she continued, "I've secured a postponement of the execution, 2 hours, starting now." Len felt the room tilt. He grabbed the edge of the bunk for balance. "Postponement?" he whispered. "You mean, I'm not—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Batista nodded solemnly. "You're not dying at 9 o'clock. We need to verify the authenticity of these new documents. If they check out, the governor may grant a formal stay." It felt like someone had shoved oxygen back into his lungs. For the first time in years, he wasn't just talking to people who tolerated his story. Someone was actually listening. "I've been saying I was innocent since day one," he muttered, almost to himself. Batista held up a hand, cautious. "This is not confirmation, but it's doubt, and that's more than you've been given in years." Len looked toward the closed door, thinking of Helen, of Eclipse, of all the mornings he thought he'd never see. A sliver of possibility had pierced through the concrete walls. And for the first time since he'd been locked away, Len Jackson wasn't counting down to the end. He was counting forward to something he never thought he'd have again. Time. Time didn't move normally after that. Every tick of the wall clock felt like a hammer and a heartbeat at once. Len sat quietly, absorbing what Batista had said, barely daring to believe it. Across the room, the chaplain returned, his calm expression unchanged, but his eyes curious, alert in a way that told Len he already sensed something had shifted. "They postponed it," Len told him, voice trembling. 2 hours, new evidence. Morris raised his eyebrows and gently sat back down, folding his hands. "That could be the miracle we prayed for," he said. Len didn't respond right away. His fingers fidgeted with the hem of his prison-issued shirt. His thoughts a jumble of relief, fear, and cautious hope. If the evidence didn't check out, would they simply restart the clock? Could he survive the emotional whiplash of almost being saved only to be led back to the table? He looked over at the door Eclipse had been taken through. The image of the dog's eyes, so alert, so alive, lingered in his mind. If today really was his last, he was grateful to have held Eclipse one more time. But if it wasn't, if there was a chance, God, what would come next? Minutes passed like slow-moving clouds. Outside his room, the usual rhythms of the prison continued. Footsteps, muffled voices, distant doors closing with dull thuds. Then another surprise. The door buzzed open again, and a familiar face leaned inside. It was the same guard from earlier, Tuttle. Only this time, he wasn't alone. Eclipse darted in beside him, tail wagging furiously, leash trailing as if he'd broken free. Len gasped. "What's going on?" he asked. Tuttle gave a half shrug. "Warden said you might want your dog with you while you wait. Figured it couldn't hurt." That simple gesture, small in the grand scheme of prison protocol, hit Len harder than anything else that day. He dropped to his knees again as Eclipse bounded toward him, practically vibrating with joy. Len let out a choked laugh and hugged the dog tightly, tears falling freely. The chaplain stepped aside, offering them the space. "Maybe we're not done yet, boy," Len whispered into Eclipse's ear. "Maybe there's still time." While Len clung to that fragile thread of hope inside the holding cell, things were moving fast on the outside. Detective Anton Delacroix sat hunched over a desk in the warden's office, his fingers flying across the keyboard, uploading files from a flash drive. His phone buzzed non-stop, his contact on the other end working to decrypt and verify financial transactions that had gone unnoticed during the original investigation. Anton had spent over 30 years in law enforcement, and this case, Len Jackson's case, was the one that haunted him. He had built it, led it, testified for it, and now he was doing everything in his power to dismantle it. Across the room, Helen sat in a rigid chair, her hands wrapped tightly around a lukewarm coffee cup she hadn't touched. She didn't need caffeine. Her pulse had been a thunderstorm since the second Batista said they were investigating new evidence. Time was bleeding out fast. They had less than 90 minutes to prove that the murder Len was convicted of had threads leading elsewhere, to someone named Walton Green, a name that had never come up in court, but who Anton now believed could have been a hired fixer, paid to silence Raymond Conincade and set Len up as the perfect fall guy. Batista's office phone rang sharply, slicing through the tension. She snatched it up. "Yes? You're sure? Location logs?" Her eyes darted toward Anton. "Give me the exact time and coordinates." She listened, scribbled something, and then slowly hung up. "That was my contact at the governor's legal office," she said. Walton Green's burner phone pinged near Conincade's penthouse the night of the murder, within 1 mile, around midnight. Then it went dark. Anton's face paled. That's the window of time the medical examiner estimated as Conincade's time of death. Helen stood, heart pounding in her chest. So Green was there. He was near the scene. Batista nodded. "We can't say he killed Conincade yet, but we can say someone else was there. Someone with motive. Someone who wasn't Len." The door opened, and Thomas Jorger stepped in, the assistant district attorney who had prosecuted Len's case 5 years ago. Helen's blood ran cold. "I was told there's new evidence," Jorger said, his voice cautious but guarded. "I'd like to see it for myself." Anton stepped forward, holding up his phone. "You're going to want to sit down for this." Jorger didn't sit. He stood frozen as Anton laid it all out. The shell corporations, the hidden transactions, the burner phone ping near the scene, and now the potential link to a professional fixer, the same Walton Green whose name had never been mentioned during Len's trial. Jorger's face went through subtle shifts: disbelief, irritation, and then something more human: discomfort. "You're telling me we put a man on death row with this hanging out there?" he asked, his voice tight. Anton didn't flinch. "I'm telling you we might have been used, that Conincade had enemies we ignored because Len was easy to convict, and that this Green guy might have been hired to do the job and leave just enough to point at Len." Helen stepped in, unable to hold back. "He's not guilty. I've known it from the start, and if you have any integrity left, you'll help us stop this." Jorger didn't respond immediately. He rubbed his temples like the weight of his career was crashing down around him. Batista's phone rang again. She answered quickly, then glanced at everyone. Governor's office says if we can get a direct tie between Green and the crime, anything real, not just proximity, they'll consider a stay of execution. Anton turned to his phone, typing furiously. Come on, he muttered. Give me something solid. And then it came. His contact sent a location map with timestamps, followed by a message. Cluster of calls from Green's burner to a second unregistered number. Calls ended minutes before estimated time of death, within 500 meters of the penthouse. Anton looked up, eyes wide. This places Green at the scene, at the exact time. He handed the phone to Batista, who didn't hesitate. She dialed the governor's legal counsel again, speaking low and fast, summarizing everything. Helen stood motionless, barely able to breathe. Jurger backed away, clearly shaken. If this is true, he said, then Len was innocent all along. Batista ended the call, her face ashen. We've got 48 hours, she said. The execution is officially stayed. They want full confirmation before issuing a formal reversal, but Len Jackson is not dying today. Helen collapsed into a chair, tears of disbelief and joy flooding her face. Anton leaned against the desk, exhaling deeply. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time, it felt like justice had finally found a crack to squeeze through. Back inside the holding cell, Len paced in slow circles, still shaken from the roller coaster of news. The idea that something, anything, might interrupt what had felt like an inevitable march toward death was too big to absorb all at once. Eclipse lay on the floor nearby, his head resting on his front paws, eyes following Len's every movement. The German Shepherd had settled again once reunited, but every time Len's footstep paused, Eclipse's ears perked. It was like the dog understood the gravity in the air, recognized his human's unease and mirrored it. Len sat back on the edge of the bunk, exhaling shakily. Chaplain Morris had stepped out to give him space, and for the first time in hours, Len was truly alone, with only Eclipse to witness the flood of thoughts rushing through him. Was this real? Would someone actually believe him this time? And what if it all slipped away again? Hope could be a cruel thing. It raised your chin just enough to make the fall even more unbearable. He rubbed Eclipse's ears gently. They say we got time now, he whispered. Just a little more. I don't know what to make of that. Then the door opened again, not with the abruptness of protocol, but with a kind of reverence, like the moment called for grace. Warden Batista stepped in, followed by Helen, her eyes puffy but glistening with something new, cautious hope. And behind her was Anton Delacroix, the detective Len hadn't seen since the trial, the man who helped send him to death row. Len's body went rigid. Mr. Jackson, Batista said gently, we've just received confirmation from the governor's office. The execution has been stayed for 48 hours, effective immediately. Len blinked, feeling his knees go weak. He might have collapsed if Helen hadn't rushed forward to steady him. Her arms wrapped around him instinctively, and this time he didn't hold back. He let her hold him, let the weight of 5 years come pouring out through shaking shoulders and trembling breath. Eclipse barked once, loudly, breaking the tension as if to say, "See? I knew it wasn't over." Len smiled through the tears, sinking into Helen's embrace. "I'm so happy," she whispered. "So damn happy." Anton stood a few feet away, clearly uncertain whether to speak. Eventually he cleared his throat. "Jackson, I'm Detective Delacroix. I led your investigation. I'm here because I believe you may have been framed." Len slowly turned toward him, eyes narrowing with restrained disbelief. He'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, where someone in power admitted the system got it wrong, but he never imagined it would come like this, quiet and trembling. "I told them all from day one," Len said, his voice cracking. "I didn't kill Raymond Conincade." Anton nodded solemnly. "I had doubts. For a long time. I failed to act when I should have. No excuses. I'm doing everything I can to make it right now." For a moment the two men locked eyes, and in that stare passed a storm of guilt, pain, and humanity. Helen spoke softly beside Len. "There's a man named Walton Green. He's tied to the case, financially, geographically. We think he was the real killer, or at least part of a setup." Len exhaled slowly, processing. "So what happens now?" Batista answered, her voice regaining its formal edge. "We've got a 2-day stay, and an emergency hearing is being scheduled. If the new evidence holds up, if the connections are as strong as they appear, you could be exonerated." Helen grasped his hand. You might not just survive this, Len. You might be free. The word hung in the air like a sacred promise. Freedom. A word Len had trained himself to stop dreaming about, and yet now it shimmered before him, tentative and real. If this is real, he said, almost afraid to say it out loud, I don't even know how to start over. Helen's eyes welled again. We'll figure it out, one day at a time. Batista glanced at her watch. Protocol says we move you out of the final holding cell and back into the general wing, but not death row. That part is over, for now. Len looked to Eclipse, still sitting like a sentinel by the door. Can he stay a little longer? Batista hesitated, then nodded. He can remain while we finalize paperwork. Miss Griggs will take him home afterward. Len knelt again and buried his face in the dog's fur. See you soon, boy, he whispered. For once, the words didn't feel like a goodbye. As the guard escorted Helen and Eclipse out of the room, Len managed a small wave. He wasn't handcuffed this time, and somehow that small mercy made all the difference. The door shut behind them with a soft click, not the thunderous slam he was used to. It was still a prison, still sterile and heavy with consequence, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a place of death. It felt like a place where something might actually begin. Detective Delacqua lingered behind the others, his eyes scanning the cell before settling on Len. I know you have every reason to hate me, he said quietly, but I swear to you, I'll do everything in my power to make sure the truth comes out. Len looked up, the exhaustion deep in his bones, but something else flickered there too. I don't hate you, he said. I'm angry. I lost 5 years, but if you can help set things right, then help. Delacqua nodded, lips pressed together, then turned and left, the door clicking softly shut behind him. Len sat on the edge of the bunk, the silence suddenly louder than before. His mind churned with 1,000 questions, but for the first time in ages, they weren't about survival. They were about tomorrow, about what it would mean to truly walk free. He glanced over to the cold burger still sitting untouched on the table, the same one he had ordered as his last meal. Funny how he couldn't bring himself to eat it now that he had time. Maybe later, when the fog cleared and his appetite returned. Outside, he could hear the distant hum of radio chatter, the rhythm of keys, the echo of boots on concrete, the usual sounds of prison life, but they felt different, like he wasn't just another number waiting for an ending. The execution had been canceled, not permanently, not yet, but enough to make him feel, for the first time in half a decade, like he was part of the living world again. News of the stay of execution traveled faster than the guards could contain it. By mid-morning, the gates outside Ironwood State Prison had become a storm of noise. Protesters shouting, reporters jostling for footage, signs waving in every direction. Some screamed that justice was being denied. Others cheered that a life had been spared. Inside Helen's pickup truck, parked just beyond the crowd, Eclipse sat panting softly in the back seat, unaware of the media circus surrounding him. Helen gripped the steering wheel tightly, her phone vibrating with messages, calls, missed notifications. Everyone wanted a comment, journalists, friends, even distant acquaintances who had seen the breaking news. But she had no interest in giving interviews. Not yet. She'd done what she came to do. Len had been granted time, and in her heart, that was all that mattered for now. A Channel 7 reporter blocked her path as she tried to pull away, microphone in hand, camera crew behind him. Miss Griggs, how do you feel about the stay of execution? Do you believe Len Jackson is innocent? Helen barely rolled down the window. No comment, she said firmly, voice trembling with a cocktail of relief and fatigue. Please, let us go. A police officer waved the reporters back and allowed her through the makeshift barricade. Once clear, Helen pulled onto the main road and drove without direction, her mind whirling. The tears didn't come until she was halfway home. They came all at once, quiet, heavy sobs that she couldn't stop. Eclipse leaned forward, pressing his snout against her shoulder as if trying to comfort her, and she reached back blindly to touch him. We did it, she whispered. We gave him more time. But as the relief settled, a new anxiety began to rise. This wasn't over. The stay was temporary. 48 hours to find proof strong enough to stop the execution permanently. And if they failed? If the investigation didn't move fast enough or the evidence fell apart, that sliver of hope could be snatched away in an instant. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. I can help prove Leonard's innocence. Contact me. She stared at it, unsure whether to believe it or dismiss it. The world was watching now, and in that chaos, Helen knew opportunists would emerge. Still, she took a screenshot. If there was any chance, even 1 in a million, that it was real, she'd send it to Dell'Oqua. They had 48 hours, and they couldn't waste a single one. Detective Dell'Oqua didn't waste a second. He drove straight from Ironwood to the Redwood City Police Department, fueled by adrenaline, guilt, and the weight of a second chance. Inside the precinct, familiar faces gave him sideways glances, some curious, others cold. He didn't care. He had a mission now, one that couldn't be buried under departmental politics or personal pride. He bypassed the front desk and made a beeline for the records room, flashing his credentials at the clerk. "I need everything related to the Conincade murder case. Evidence logs, witness statements, forensic reports. Now." The clerk blinked, caught off guard. "Those files are archived. You're not even active on that case anymore." Anton's jaw tightened. "It's active now. Mark it under official review. Leonard Jackson's life depends on what's in those boxes." The clerk, sensing the gravity, disappeared into the archive stacks. 10 minutes later, Anton was in a dimly lit side room, surrounded by dusty folders and fading crime scene photos. He spread them out, flipping through them with urgency. Some were familiar, others weren't. Then he saw it, a folder labeled Forensic Report Number 2. He froze. He had never seen a second report before. Opening it, he read details that made his stomach churn. Partial footprints that didn't match Len or Conincade. Signs of forced entry from a fire escape window. And most damning, traces of gunpowder residue at the scene, when the official cause of death had been stabbing. The report had been marked inconclusive and noted that it was excluded from the primary file due to chain of custody issues. Anton slammed the folder shut, blood boiling. This wasn't oversight. This was suppression. Someone had buried this evidence. Someone had decided that a cleaner case was better than a true one. He gathered the materials quickly, knowing time was short. Taking these files without clearance could land him in hot water, but he didn't care. If the DA's office wanted to stall, let them try. He was done protecting a broken system. He approached the clerk again, jaw tight. "Log these under active investigation. Put my name on them. I'm the lead now." The clerk hesitated, then nodded. Anton walked out with the files under his arm and a fire in his chest. If this evidence saw the light of day in time, it could change everything. While Anton was risking protocol to unearth buried truths, Assistant DA Thomas Jorger stood by his office window in downtown Redwood City, phone clutched tightly to his ear. His stomach churned with dread. The call had come directly from the elected district attorney, the one who'd once praised him as a rising star. Now that same DA was warning him, "If Len Jackson turns out to be innocent, you'll be the one holding the bag." Jorger hung up, his knuckles white. 5 years ago, the Jackson case had made his career. It was high profile, politically convenient, and airtight, or so it seemed. Now the seams were ripping open, one by one. And if Anton Dell'Oqua kept finding suppressed forensics, if Walton Green's ties to the murder became undeniable, Jorger knew exactly what would happen. The office would sacrifice him to protect the institution. His name would be in headlines, not for winning a conviction, but for nearly executing an innocent man. A knock at his door jolted him. His junior attorney, Bryce Corian, entered holding a trembling printout. "Sir, the Redwood Press is publishing a story tomorrow. Headline reads, 'Detective Dell'Oqua uncovers missing forensics in Jackson case. They want your comment.'" Jorger read the words on the page, each one tightening the noose around his reputation. "Missing forensics," he muttered. "So he found the second report." Corian nodded nervously. "They're claiming there were footprints, gunpowder traces, and signs of forced entry, all excluded from trial evidence. If that's true, it's going to blow everything wide open." Jorger's face darkened. "Get in touch with the forensics lab. I want names. Who filed that report, who signed off on excluding it, and whether it ever reached my desk." He paused, then added, "And start digging into Walton Green. Last known associates, travel records, anything. If he was really in Redwood City the night of the murder, we need to know yesterday." Corian scribbled notes frantically. "And if we confirm it?" he asked. Jorger exhaled sharply. "Then we start damage control. We admit we were misled. We cooperate with the review. Maybe, just maybe, we salvage some credibility." Corian darted out the door, leaving Jorger alone again. The DA's once shining star sat at his desk, staring at the wall, remembering every decision he made during Len's trial, every witness he chose, every question he avoided. Whether by negligence or by willful blindness, he had helped send a man to death row. And now, it was all unraveling. Back in Ironwood's maximum security wing, Len lay on his bunk wide awake, the overhead fluorescent light buzzing in rhythm with the hum in his chest. Midnight had passed, but he couldn't sleep. Not after a day like that. Not after standing so close to death and then being yanked back by the thinnest thread of hope. Chaplain Morris had checked on him one last time, offering a prayer before retreating to let Len rest. Helen and Eclipse were long gone, and the silence in the cell was once again thick, but it didn't feel like the same kind of silence he'd known for years. This one wasn't filled with dread. It was filled with possibility. Distant footsteps echoed now and then in the corridor. A guard passed his door and paused. "Jackson?" he called softly. Len sat up. "Yeah? Just wanted to say..." The guard shifted uncomfortably. "I'm glad you're still here." He nodded once. "Heard you might be innocent." Len managed a faint smile. "Thanks." The guard gave a small salute and walked on. Len leaned back against the wall and stared up at the ceiling, images of Eclipse flashing through his mind. The rescue shelter, that tail wag, that dog had saved him once before, and now, maybe again. Sleep came in fits, and when Len woke just before dawn, he was already upright. Something felt different. A new tension in the air, but not the kind that squeezes your lungs. It was anticipation. Then came the knock. "Jackson, on your feet," the voice said. "You're being transferred out of Max. Pre-release holding. Pending hearing." For a moment, Len didn't move. "Say that again?" he asked, breath catching. "Looks like they're getting ready for a hearing. Judge Alvarez is reviewing the new evidence." Len stood slowly, heart thudding. Pre-release. That word alone sent a wave of disbelief through his chest. He dressed quickly, palms sweaty as the guard waited. The transport van felt like a coffin on wheels, cold and sterile, but this time it wasn't driving him toward death. It was taking him back to the courthouse, not for sentencing, but for something new, a shot at life. He didn't see any reporters, just clean marble floors, neutral walls, and a hallway that smelled of wax and something Len couldn't quite place. Maybe freedom. When he saw Helen waiting on a bench, hair pulled back, jeans wrinkled from the long night, he knew this wasn't a dream. She stood and rushed to him, grabbing his hands through the cuffs. "You okay?" she whispered. "Better than yesterday," he replied. Helen's eyes searched his face like she couldn't believe he was really standing in front of her. There were new lines around his eyes, and the exhaustion was plain, but his gaze was clear, more alive than it had been in years. "They're holding an emergency hearing," she explained quickly, her voice low. "Detective Delacqua, Warden Batista, even Assistant DA Jorger, they're all here. They're presenting the new evidence." Len blinked. "Jorger? He's helping now." Helen nodded. "Looks like he realized this is bigger than just his career. They've confirmed that second forensic report you never got to see. And the phone records. It's all on the table." Len squeezed her hands. "You've been up all night, haven't you?" She gave a shaky laugh. "I'd do it all again, 1,000,000 times." Before they could say anything else, a bailiff stepped into the hallway. "Let's go. The judge is ready." The courtroom was quiet, almost eerily so. Judge Alvarez presided from the bench, stern and composed. Len was guided to the defense table, shackles still on his wrists. But this wasn't death row anymore. This was something else. Something Len hadn't dared imagine. He glanced at the man sitting beside him, a young public defender who had only just been assigned after Len's original lawyer had retired. The attorney leaned in and whispered, "We're going to argue to vacate the conviction entirely. You just need to breathe. Let us handle it." Across the aisle, Len spotted Jorger sitting stiffly, face unreadable, flanked by members of the governor's legal team. Delacqua was behind him, clutching a folder thick with documents. Batista stood by the wall, her arms crossed but her gaze steady, supportive. Judge Alvarez's voice broke the silence. "We're convened today to address newly surfaced evidence concerning the conviction of Leonard Jackson. Mr. Jorger, as the prosecutor in the original trial, please summarize." Jorger stood slowly, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, since the stay of execution, we've uncovered critical findings. Phone records show a man named Walton Green, previously unknown to the court, was within 1 mile of the victim's location at the time of death. Additionally, a second forensic report, which was never presented at trial, shows footprints and ballistic evidence inconsistent with Mr. Jackson. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Len stared straight ahead, barely breathing. Was this really happening? Judge Alvarez raised an eyebrow. Are you confirming this second report was withheld from both the court and the defense? Jurger hesitated, then nodded with visible discomfort. I can't say for certain who withheld it, Your Honor, but it never reached my desk, and I've confirmed with the forensics lab that the evidence was deemed inconclusive and quietly archived. His voice faltered, but he pressed on. Given these developments, the state concedes that the foundation of Mr. Jackson's conviction is no longer reliable. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Len sat frozen, every muscle in his body clenched. After 5 years of being dismissed, silenced, and condemned, those words, "the state concedes," landed like a punch to the chest. His new attorney stood. Your Honor, we move to vacate the conviction and release Mr. Jackson immediately, pending further review or dismissal of all charges. Judge Alvarez looked between both sides, his face unreadable. Mr. Jurger, does the state oppose? Another pause. Then, we do not. The gavel came down with a sharp bang, a sound Len would never forget. Then the motion is granted, Alvarez said. Mr. Jackson, you are hereby released on your own recognizance. Any further proceedings will depend on new charges, but based on current evidence, you are free to go. This court apologizes for the miscarriage of justice you have endured. Len's shackles were removed. His breath caught. His hands were free. His body, trembling. Helen was already moving toward him. They met in the middle of the room, arms wrapping around each other before words could even form. The gallery behind them erupted in applause, some from legal aides, some from staff who had followed the case quietly over the years. Delocqua gave Batista a nod. Even Jurger sat still, staring at the floor, the weight of it all finally visible in his eyes. Len turned to Helen, tears brimming. We did it, he whispered. You brought me home. She smiled through her own tears, resting her forehead against his. Yeah, she whispered. Let's go home. They stepped out of the courthouse into bright midday sun, and for a second, Len had to close his eyes. It had been years since he felt sunlight without bars in between. The steps outside were crowded with media, but Len and Helen didn't stop. They had no statement to give, no speech prepared. All they wanted was distance. As they reached the parking lot, the passenger door to Helen's pickup swung open, and Eclipse leapt out, tail wagging, barking joyously. The German shepherd bounded toward Len in broad arcs, oblivious to the cameras, the murmuring crowd, the spectacle. Just his human. Len dropped to his knees as Eclipse tackled him with licks and excited paws. The reunion this time not burdened by time limits or heavy protocol. It was freedom. Messy, loud, honest freedom. Helen watched with a hand over her mouth, crying and laughing all at once. Together, the three of them climbed into the truck and drove away slowly, no longer in a rush, no longer outrunning doom. Len looked out the window as they passed streets that felt both familiar and foreign. Some storefronts were gone, others transformed. Life had moved on without him, but now he was ready to catch up. At Helen's modest house, they didn't talk much. They unpacked a few things. Eclipse explored the rooms like he was reclaiming old territory. Helen handed Len a spare phone and showed him the couch, then paused. You know, this is your home too, if you want it. Len nodded, voice quiet. I do. Later, while she made tea in the kitchen, Len stood by the window, watching Eclipse do lazy circles in the backyard. The dog paused to look back at him, and Len smiled. The road ahead would be hard. Lawsuits, reintegration, trauma that couldn't be erased. But this moment was real. This life was his again. And just as he was beginning to feel grounded, the phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. There's still a target on your back. Conancade's partners know you're free. Be careful. Len read it twice, then locked the screen. The world wasn't done with him yet. But he wasn't the same man they locked away. He wasn't broken. He had Helen. He had Eclipse, and he had a future. That was enough, for now.